I picked up an extra shift because I needed to pay some overdue bills, and around 11 p.m., I got a call for a ride in a remote part of the city. The passenger was a woman in her 30s, thin, with long black hair, wearing a coat way too big for the heat that night. She got into the car all tense, glancing behind her like someone was following. "It'll be a smooth ride," I said, trying to calm her down. But she cut me off right away. "Please, don't take the main highway. Something's wrong, they might be following me." I thought it was strange, but she seemed desperate, so I agreed and took a darker alternate route. At first, I thought everything was fine. But after about 15 minutes of driving, I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. They weren't constant, but they also didn't seem to be passing. I felt uneasy, but figured it might just be paranoia. Then the woman let out a low moan and grabbed the back of my seat. "It's him. He's following us," she practically screamed, pointing at the rearview mirror. I looked again, and this time, the headlights were closer. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. "Are you sure?" I asked, trying to stay calm. She just nodded frantically and told me to speed up. I obeyed without thinking too much, but the discomfort had already turned into real fear. I drove faster than I should have, but the road was dark and full of sharp turns. The woman next to me seemed on the verge of a breakdown, muttering things I couldn't quite understand. She clutched her phone in her hand, but the screen was off, as if she were waiting for a call or message that never came. The headlights behind us stayed there, relentless, slowly gaining ground. I tried to steady my nerves and focus on the road, but then I hit a tight curve, and everything went wrong. The car skidded on loose gravel, and I lost control. The impact was violent. I remember the sound of shattering glass and the airbag inflating in my face before everything went dark for a few seconds. When I came to, my head was throbbing, and my right arm was numb. I stumbled out of the car, trying to figure out where I was. The other car, the one with the headlights that had been following us, had stopped just behind mine. But the woman, she was gone. I searched around, called out her name, but there was no trace of her. No footprints in the muddy ground around the car, no sign that she'd even gotten out after the crash. That's when the driver of the other car stepped out. He was a tall man, dressed all in black, with a calm, almost eerie demeanor. He looked at me and said bluntly, "You just saved your life. She was using you to throw them off." Before I could ask anything, he got back in his car and drove off, leaving me alone on that deserted road. I stood there frozen for a few minutes, trying to make sense of what had happened. The woman who had seemed so desperate simply vanished without a trace. My heart was pounding as I tried to call emergency services, but my phone had no signal out there. That's when I heard the distant sound of sirens. A few minutes later, a police cruiser appeared on the road. They said they'd received an anonymous tip about an accident in the area. When I asked if they'd seen anyone else around, the officers shook their heads, looking clueless. Months later, I still think about that night every single day. I never found out who that woman was or the mysterious man who warned me about her. The police told me there were no records of anyone else involved in the accident, as if she'd never existed. I went back to driving after a while, but I've never taken rides to remote places since. Sometimes, when I'm driving at night, I get the feeling that someone's in the back seat, even though I know the car is empty. And whenever I see headlights in my rearview mirror, my body freezes, remembering that night. Whoever that woman was, she saved my life by using me, or maybe I was just caught in the middle of something far bigger than I can understand. I had left a party early because I wasn't feeling well, and all I wanted was to get home and sleep. The driver seemed normal at first glance, a man in his 40s, with stubble on his face and a dark baseball cap. But as soon as we started moving, I realized something was off. He was too quiet, no small talk about, "Do you work or study?" And his hands, they were gripping the steering wheel like he was trying to crush it. I felt uneasy but told myself maybe he was just antisocial. That's when I picked up my phone to check how much longer it would take to get home, and I noticed, we'd been circling the same area for at least 20 minutes. The app's map clearly showed we'd passed the same gas station 3 times. "Are you sure we're on the right route?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but my voice trembled. He hesitated before answering, as if carefully choosing his words. "The GPS is broken," he muttered without looking at me. His voice was low, tense, and he kept driving without changing his expression. My heart started racing. I knew something was very wrong. I asked to get out, but he completely ignored me, as if I hadn't even spoken. Before I knew it, he was turning onto a dark, abandoned rural road where I could barely see the lane markings. My mind started spinning in 1,000 directions as I tried to figure out what to do. That's when I noticed the notebook on the seat next to me. It was partially hidden, but my curiosity got the better of me. When I picked it up, my hands shook so badly I almost dropped it. The pages were filled with scribbled notes in tight, nervous handwriting, perfect routes to avoid witnesses, ideal choices based on timing and location, and even detailed maps with points marked in red. At the end of the notebook, there was a list of names and dates. My stomach churned when I realized the most recent entries were from the past few days, and one of them seemed to match today's date. I couldn't breathe properly. I looked at the driver again, and this time he had a strange smile on his face, as if he knew exactly what I had just discovered. He sped up even more, and the car began to rattle on the uneven dirt road. Desperate, I decided I had to get out, no matter what. I waited for him to slow down on a sharp curve and, without thinking twice, pulled the handle and opened the door while the car was still moving. I rolled out onto the cold, hard ground, feeling rocks and twigs tearing at my skin. It hurt like hell, but I knew I had to keep moving. I stumbled to my feet and ran away from the road, trying to find someplace safe. That's when I saw a cabin faintly lit by a dim light in the distance. I banged on the door, crying and shaking uncontrollably. An elderly couple answered, and after hearing my frantic story, they let me in and called the police. They were kind, but I could see the fear in their eyes as they helped me clean the cuts and scrapes all over my body. When the police arrived, I told them everything: the strange driver, the disturbing notebook, my desperate escape. They listened silently, but I noticed worried glances exchanged as they took down the details. A few hours later, they showed me a photo of a man who had been arrested years ago for kidnapping and unlawful imprisonment. It was him. The same serious face, the same hollow eyes. Only now, apparently, he had been recently released for good behavior. My whole body went cold when I heard that. The officers told me other passengers had filed complaints against him in recent months, but nothing concrete enough to arrest him again. At least not until that night. Weeks later, I still get chills every time I see a car that looks like that Uber. I can't use ride-sharing apps alone anymore, and whenever I'm in an unfamiliar place, I obsessively check routes and emergency exits. The police said they found the car abandoned on the rural road, but the driver disappeared without a trace. Sometimes, I think about that notebook and the words written inside it, and I wonder if I was the first person to escape him. Or if others had tried and weren't as lucky. Whoever he was, I know he's still out there. And it makes me sleep with one eye open, always ready to run if I have to. Everything seemed normal at first. The car arrived quickly, the driver appeared calm, and the back seat was clean, without that musty smell typical of older vehicles. But as soon as I got in, I felt something strange, a strong smell of wet dirt and mildew, like someone had left soggy garden bags there for days. I thought it was odd, but figured it might just be my imagination or something I couldn't quite place. That's when I noticed the driver's glances. He kept looking into the rearview mirror, as if he were talking to someone in the back seat. But I was alone. There was no one else. I tried to ignore it, thinking maybe he was distracted or even talking to me without realizing it. Then he chuckled softly and muttered something that made my blood run cold. "She likes to chat during the rides." A chill ran down my spine. Who the hell was she? I looked around, trying to see if I'd missed something, but the seat was empty. I tried to stay calm and asked, my voice trembling, "Who are you talking to?" He didn't answer directly, just smirked into the rearview mirror, a crooked, unsettling smile. I started sweating profusely and demanded that he stop the car immediately. But he simply ignored me, as if he hadn't heard. Before I knew it, we were entering a dark road surrounded by dense forest. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would burst out of my chest. I knew I had to do something before it was too late. I glanced around, searching for anything I could use to distract him. My bag was on my lap, so in a desperate impulse, I hurled everything inside it at the windshield with all the strength I could muster. He flinched, swore loudly, and momentarily lost control of the wheel. I used the confusion to yank the door handle and jump out while the car was still moving. I rolled onto the asphalt, feeling it scrape my arms and legs. It hurt like hell, but I knew I couldn't stop. I stumbled to my feet and started running toward the forest, tripping over rocks and roots along the way. As I ran, I heard heavy footsteps behind me, like boots stomping on wet ground. It sounded like he was chasing me, and that only made me run faster. My heart felt like it was about to explode, and my breaths were so ragged I could barely see straight. That's when I tripped over a massive root and face-planted into the ground. I was sure it was over when I heard a deep voice ask, "Are you okay?" It was an older man, dressed like a hunter, holding a flashlight. I could barely speak through my fear, but he understood the situation and helped me up. He took me to his truck and dropped me off at the nearest police station, where I finally managed to tell them everything that had happened. The police went to the scene where it all took place. The driver's car was abandoned in the middle of the forest, headlights still on and the driver's door wide open, as if he'd fled in a hurry. But what really chilled me were the fresh bloodstains on the back seat. They looked recent, and there was something deeply wrong about the whole scene. It wasn't just a case of an abandoned vehicle. When they opened the trunk, they found an old, dirty doll dressed in clothes almost identical to what I'd been wearing that night, a black coat and faded jeans. The doll had long, tangled hair, and its glass eyes seemed to stare at me in a way that made me want to vomit. The officers looked just as uneasy as I felt when they saw it. To this day, no one knows who that driver was or why he seemed obsessed with me, or with the doll. The investigation went nowhere, and the man simply vanished. Sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I catch that same smell of wet dirt and mildew, and my whole body freezes. I can't help but think he might still be out there, looking for someone else to take into the forest. And that doll, every time I see one like it in store windows or antique shops, I have to look away. Whatever happened that night, I know I barely escaped. And that she might still be waiting for someone else. I'd been working as an Uber driver for a few months, and this was my last ride before calling it a night. I got a call to pick up a passenger on a remote highway, which already made me suspicious because it's rare for anyone to request a ride in places like that. When I arrived, I saw a man standing under a streetlight, soaked to the bone, shivering from either the cold or nerves, I couldn't tell. He got into the car in a rush, his clothes dripping water all over the back seat. My car skidded off the road and hit the guardrail, he explained quickly, without looking at me. I need to get to the police station to file a report. It seemed like just another case of bad luck caused by the rain, so I agreed to take him. But as I drove, I started noticing strange things about him. The guy avoided looking into the rearview mirror, as if he were afraid of seeing something there. Every now and then, he muttered under his breath, disjointed phrases like, "I shouldn't have done it," or, "They're going to catch me." And there was something hidden under his coat, a rectangular shape that he clutched tightly against his chest. I felt uneasy but tried to convince myself it was just paranoia. Then I noticed fresh mud stains on the back seat, wet, muddy streaks that definitely weren't there before. I asked him about it, trying to sound casual, but he gave a vague response, "It's just dirt from the road." That didn't make sense. The highway where I'd picked him up was practically clean asphalt, except for the parts wet from the rain. That's when the car radio started acting strangely. The stations changed on their own, picking up distorted transmissions with voices talking about a fatal accident on the same highway where I'd found that man. I couldn't make out everything clearly, but I heard something like, "body found in the vehicle," and "weapon located at the scene." My heart started racing, and I glanced in the rearview mirror again. The man was motionless, but his hand was gripping whatever was under his coat even tighter. I decided to stop at a gas station up ahead to check the car and try to clear my head. When I pulled over, he snapped irritably, "Why are we stopping?" His voice was tense, almost trembling. I told him I needed to check the seat because of the mud, but before I could even get out of the car, I heard shouting from the back seat. I turned quickly and opened the back door, and that's when I saw him holding a bloody knife. He was in a panic, muttering non-stop, "They're making me do this, they're going to catch me." His eyes were glazed over, as if he didn't even realize I was there. I didn't think twice. I ran inside the gas station, asking the staff for help while trying to explain what was happening. They called the police immediately. When the officers arrived, they searched the man and confirmed he was wanted for murder. They told me that earlier that evening, another driver had been found dead in a crashed car on the highway, and the passenger I was transporting kept insisting that the person had survived the accident. While the police questioned the man, I sat inside the gas station, shaking so badly I could barely hold the cup of coffee one of the employees had offered me. I couldn't stop thinking about what might have happened if I hadn't stopped at that gas station. He had been sitting right behind me, with a bloody knife, muttering nonsense. I could very well have been the next victim, and it left me feeling like I was still in shock. The officers said the man had a history of psychotic episodes and was already considered dangerous. He had attacked another driver after his car skidded off the road, possibly due to a nervous breakdown. The victim's body was found trapped in the wreckage, but the man seemed convinced the person was still alive and pursuing him. Weeks later, I still think about that night every time I get into my car to work. I hesitate to accept late-night rides in remote areas, and I always double-check passengers before starting the trip. Sometimes, when I drive past deserted highways on rainy days, I remember his words, "They're making me do this." Who were they? Did he really believe he was being controlled? Or was it all just a product of his troubled mind? Whatever the explanation, I know I narrowly escaped. And even with all the safety protocols of ride-sharing apps, sometimes you never truly know who's climbing into the back seat of your car.